All right, GM Abstractors, and welcome back to the seventh episode of The Abstract. Super excited about today's chat. We've got Arjun from Everclear joining us. Uh, Arjun, Everclear has been shaking things up in the world of chain abstraction recently, and you guys have hit a huge milestone by launching Claire. So great to have you here. How's everything on your side after this big launch?
Good. I mean, Everclear has been growing pretty awesomely over the last like few months, which is really great to see. Like the protocol itself is like one of the few things that's like gaining volume and traction right now in the Brit space, despite the fact that we're in like a bear market and despite the bear market downturn. And so that's really awesome to see. We like have kind of also released recently some like analytics and like analytics tooling that shows that like Everclear is also now like the cheapest option to be able to do kind of like large scale transfers between chains on just about every single chain that we support. So we're, I feel like we're in a fantastic spot. We're like working with just about everybody, which is awesome. And like we're continuing to grow.
That's awesome to hear, man. Can you talk a little bit about why Everclear felt like this was the right moment to launch Claire, and what was the vision behind it?
Yeah. And for clarity, like we Clear is a token that's basically like migrated from our old token Next, right? So before Everclear was existed, we were known as Connext, and we like rebranded about a year ago. And we felt that it was important to kind of rebrand the token and migrate the token because partly to kind of keep things in sync and make sure that it's like clear to people, no pun intended, what the project is doing, and like the token is a part of that. But then also just because we were working towards a new token model that was pushing for a kind of like vote escrow locking based mechanism that would drive like incentives towards growth. So that is also kind of live and part of like the token system today.
Amazing, amazing. Now that the Clear token is live and out, I'm sure things are getting real busy for you guys. What's Everclear's immediate like game plan to push adoption now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like what we're doing right now is clearly working, right? We have PMF and we're growing. I think there's some like limitations that we have to be able to grow like infinitely, and just like there are for any kind of organization, you keep hitting, because you grow, you keep hitting kind of new ceilings that you have to like work through. For us right now, that is basically scaling up available capital in like our kind of backup solver in our system, and using that to kind of go and solve on other protocols as well. So we basically like dog food our own product, solve on other bridges like across and things like that. And then because our system relies on netting, this actually creates like more nettable flow that improves like the economics for everyone, which is kind of cool. And so we are like we're kind of thinking through strategies to be able to like grow our capital base right now in the system. We have about like $500,000 of solver liquidity that we like have internally that we use, but we're trying to grow that. I mean, ideally like 10 to 20x. And then we're also looking at like working with a lot of other projects that can then also provide like basically like fallback liquidity in the system. And the idea here is like if you are so our target market is like institutional value flows, right? So people who are not like users that are using bridges, not end users that are using bridges, but like the bridge liquidity providers themselves, right? The solvers that are going and filling transactions on another chain as part of making your end user bridge transaction happen, or centralized exchanges or market makers, things like that, right? And for all of these actors, you're talking about doing transactions that are quite large, right? Like 100K to 500,000 to sometimes over a million range. And where like the important consideration is around like price, where like even one BPS matters a lot, versus time, where like as opposed to like an end user transaction where you want it to go through in seconds. For these like institutional players, they're okay if it takes like 10 to 20 minutes, as long as they're guaranteed to get the best price. And so for all of these players, we want to kind of work towards being able to give those kinds of guarantees around price, and then also just around execution and things like that, and do that at like higher and higher scales of liquidity. So get to the point where like, right today we're working with like all of these solvers. I think the average transaction size in the network right now is about like 50K. which is pretty substantial. I think much higher than just than anything else in the space, right? But we really want to work towards a model where like the average transaction size is more like closer to like $500,000, right? And for that to happen, you need to, and like for us to be then working with like these very large market makers, we need to have sufficient amount of liquidity in the system as a backup in case there is not enough flows going the opposite direction. So that's a bit of a chicken egg problem. We kind of have to like keep cycling upwards as we go. And so, yeah, like the second kind of piece that we're doing there is like integrations into some of the new types of lending protocols that are being built around across chains. So being able to like borrow liquidity to be able to like fill transactions or provide like counterparty liquidity and then repay that back later when like other flows show up in the system.
Nice, nice. So you mentioned adoption,
Yeah.
and I know you guys probably have specific areas where you guys are really zeroing on. So, which particular market segments or use cases are topping Everclear's priority list this year?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, solvers are still like the really big one, right? They're, I would say like 99% of our focus, maybe not 99%, but I would say like 80% of our focus right now goes towards solvers and the solver ecosystem because there is just a very huge and obvious problem there. Like solvers need a way to rebalance their capital. And maybe just to take a step back and kind of help everyone understand like what exactly the specific problem that Everclear is solving. So for most of the bridges that exist today, all of the kind of intent-based bridges, so things like Cross or Relay, or I mean, even a lot of the others non-intent bridges, the design paradigm is that when you as a user, say you're sending like 100 USDC from Arbitrum to Base, the design paradigm today is like there is a liquidity provider on Base that gives you you send 100 USDC on Arbitrum. There's a liquidity provider on Base that gives you 100 USDC immediately. And then that liquidity provider gets repaid using your funds on Arbitrum, right? So what's happened for the LP is the LP has given you money on Base and then they're receiving money on Arbitrum. Obviously their funds have moved. Right? Over time, their funds move towards chains where they're like least likely to be used because that's just kind of what happens, right? Like they end up kind of getting stuck in places where like users are coming from where there's not any flows going in the opposite direction to get them unstuck. And so this requires, for all of these LPs, which we call solvers, this requires rebalancing, which means they have to take their funds from Arbitrum and put them back to Base. Or if you're going to like coming from like a more long tail chain, right? Take their funds from something like DGen chain, where it's like there's relatively little adoption, relatively little traction at the moment, and then find a way to bridge them back to Base. It's that last step of like how do you actually rebalance your liquidity, which is the big blocker today for bridges to scale, for all of these intent bridges to be able to go and expand to new ecosystems, for all solvers to be able to go and scale up the liquidity, to be able to basically generate more profit and improve user pricing. They all need to find better ways to rebalance. And Everclear is the solution to that, right? There's instead of like everybody's kind of like dealing with bridges and things like that. And of course, you can use bridges to go back and forth, but the real solution is to find ways to actually allow these solvers to coordinate with each other to reduce the need to rebalance altogether. And that's what Everclear does. Everclear says, hey, if there's a transaction that's going, if solvers want to rebalance from Arbitrum to Base, and then there are other solvers that want to rebalance from Base to Arbitrum, Everclear finds those coincidences of wants, matches them together, and then these solvers are basically just like swapping with each other effectively through our system. And this drives their cost of rebalancing, the time it takes to rebalance, effectively down to zero, right? Which is amazing. It really massively improves the economics for solvers. It makes it a lot easier for anyone to be a solver and not just like the large scale market makers. And so, yeah, I would say like our target market right now is really centered around solvers because we are very specifically fixing this problem for them. But what we've realized is like this problem extends to a bunch of other ecosystems as well, right? So this very same problem exists for centralized exchanges that want to be able to bring liquidity to like support a new chain, for instance. Like if they want to support deposits and withdrawals from Sonic, they need to go and build liquidity on Sonic, and then they need to figure out how to rebalance their liquidity back and forth from Sonic to other chains. It also exists for market makers, exists for basically anyone that is holding like large amounts of capital on a given chain. And so Everclear is basically like effectively works like a clearinghouse for all of these players. And so our kind of P0 market is the solvers, but then after that, we're like looking at a lot of these larger institutional flows as well, like centralized exchanges and market makers.
That's really impressive that what you're guys trying to achieve here. So for you guys, exactly what does success looks for Everclear now? Are there certain metrics or market signals you're especially focusing on?
Yeah. I mean, our primary metric is just volume, right? So like we want to drive as much volume through Everclear as possible, because volume through our system is an indicator that there is like flow that is usable for netting, right? The more volume that's going through the system, the more other volume can kind of go in the other direction in order to be netted out. And it's overall just like a good proxy indication of usage, right? Volume is also how we capture fees. So like the protocol has kind of varying fee rates depending on the chain. So there's like a bunch of chains, for example, like all the top 5 chains. So like Optimism, Arbitrum, Base, Solana, and one other chain. I can't remember it's off the top of my head. But for all of those chains, we have 0 fees. We just don't charge anything at all. And the reason for this is that like we want to kind of give this best price guarantee that like we will always just match whatever is the best in the market. And the next best thing in the market is to just go through a centralized exchange and not pay any money. So for all of those chains, we are free. And then for any of the other kind of like longer tail chains, we have basically graduated prices depending on how much liquidity is available and like what else is available on the chain. We are always cheaper than everything else, but like how much depends on like the specific chain. So there are some chains where we're charging like a few BPS and some chains where we're charging like 10. And 1 BPS is like 0.01%. So it's very, very tiny. And so overall in the network, like the system ends up charging like 3 basis points or something like that on all of the total volume that goes through the network. So like that's also volume is also a good metric to track like how much is the protocol actually earning, and like the earnings that are generated by the protocol go back towards repurchasing the Clear token.
That's pretty impressive. And I bet launching Clear has probably changed your approach to developer and community side of things as well. Have you seen any shifts there compared to your pre-launch stats?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's obviously like 3 phases, right? There was like pre-launching next, then there was like post-launching next, pre sort of migration to Clear, and then there's post-migration to Clear. I would say like pre-launching next, obviously this was like 2022, and like at the time, airdrop farming was just insane, and like so it was like a little bit difficult to even like track and figure out how much like real user behavior existed, right? We had a ton of people in the community that were talking all the time, but it was like undoubtedly just a ton of like fake usage and fake like just bots and stuff like that. I think a lot of the like industrial airdrop farming has kind of died down because airdrops in general have been like capitulated so much that like now people are like realizing there's not actually a lot of money to be made in like industrially farming them. And so I think like things have kind of changed there, which is good. I think that's actually a very, very good thing for the industry. So like post launch with Next, we, and even now with Clear, we had this kind of like core token holder community that now that like the launch is gone, we like know that they are like actual believers, right? That community organizes we have a DAO, and so we have like the DAO forums as well as our Telegram and Discord. It's a group of people that are just like very individually passionate about figuring out ways to make this project like work. And so we have really awesome community members that have sort of like reached out on like the marketing side, and some people that like work on just like moderation and like support and things like that. So yeah, there's a nice like organic grassroots ecosystem around it.
Love it, love it. So, stepping back a bit, now that you passed the TG, have you noticed like your perspective changing at all, like regarding where the biggest opportunities might lie? Maybe some undeserved areas Everclear is now eyeing onto.
Um, yeah, I mean that's a good question. I would say like where we are right now is still very underserved. And I am really, really think it's very important right now that we're just extremely laser focused on our adoption. And so, because we just think that there's like right now there's no direct competitors. There are like a lot of indirect competitors to Everclear, but nobody's directly competing. And we have this like opportunity window where we can go and capture a lot of market share, and like we can basically generate this like network effect that makes Everclear extremely defensible. And that's happening, right? Like we did like 120 million in volume last month, and that was like really painful to bootstrap just because there was like this chicken and egg that we had to work through. But like now that we're noticing that like additional volume is much easier. So we're having much easier time with onboarding new solvers and onboarding it, like getting existing solvers to increase their volume. I would say like for that reason, we aren't looking too deeply at like other like new markets at the moment, just because it just is really important to execute and get this right. That said, from a research perspective, I'm personally quite interested in a few other things. Like I think that there are some really interesting tie-ins between Everclear and AI. I think like the future of like solving, and I actually think the future of the entirety of finance will just be agents and it will just be automated. There's no reason for humans to do finance anymore. Like it just doesn't make sense. I think a lot of our like original theses around blockchains are kind of wrong. Like we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this stuff like usable for end users, and it's a very difficult problem because like there's just so much there's so much friction that comes with like self custody and privacy and things like that that like you as a user have to like wade through, right? Like figuring out how to manage and store like seed phrases and stuff like that is just like difficult for an average user. And you can obfuscate it behind like semi-custodial or custodial mechanisms, and then that makes it easier for the user. But then you're like kind of losing some of the benefits of the chain, right? But for AI, that's not really a problem. And I think like more and more people are going to head towards a world where they're like, well, why do I have to be visibly manually going and like optimizing my like yield between a bunch of different chains to farm stuff? Like, why do I have to be actively looking at tokens and trading them? Why can I not just set up automated strategies to do these things? And like the answer is you can, right? And I think like most financial institutions will just head towards this outcome because it's much cheaper and faster and easier than paying somebody to do it. And so yeah, I think the future of this is a controversial take because a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I think the future of solving and the future of intents is just AI. Like I think intents are pretty much entirely going to be serviced by agents and bots. And like I think for those users, like the agentic solvers, Everclear makes even more sense because it's like for an agentic solver, like you are just like optimizing as much as you possibly can on things like price and on consistency and on access to a bunch of different ecosystems. And like things like integration overhead actually become a lot less important than they are today for a developer, for a team that's like actively having to like monitor something.
That's actually a really nice take. So speaking of the broader picture here, outside Everclear, what other types of projects or infra in chain abstraction space have got you excited right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. In the chain abstraction space, I would say like, I mean, I think like everybody's basically shipping or very close to shipping. So I'm excited for people to kind of do that, right? Like what I want is for people to actually start integrating into applications. I've been waiting for that now for years. It's just taken a really long time. I think that like chain abstraction projects, like things like Particle, for example, and a lot of others, right? Everybody's like in the process of trying to go and get that first cohort of users, so you can showcase what does this stuff look like when it's actually chain abstracted? Like what does it look like to have an exchange application or like a lending protocol or something where like users just don't need to care what chain it's on? And I think that it's been years that we've been talking about that idea, but it's like finally here, which is exciting. I would say like everybody needs to really accelerate a lot more. I think like I'm not sensing enough kind of like urgency to try to solve these problems as I think we should have. And I think that I think a part of the reason for that is that I think like in crypto, we've kind of become like pigeonholed into being very focused on what's right in front of us. And that's good. Like it's good to focus, but I do think that like people are ignoring how easy it's actually becoming now to do integrations with things like MCP. So like my recommendation for projects is just like build it. If you're building a chain abstraction protocol, build an MCP server because it will allow people to like vibe code integrations into your stuff. And like that's how you'll actually get adoption, right? Like it's not going to be going to developers and being like, hey, put this in your priority list, and then like they'll get to it months later. It's going to be like, let anybody do this very easily in like 2 minutes. Yeah, aside from that, I would say like outside of the chain abstraction space, I mean, I think like, I mean, we're obviously going towards stablecoin finance, right? Like we are basically bringing TradFi on chain. This is going to happen. It's not like just, this is like, we've sort of been saying for a very long time, the institutions are coming, but now they are actually coming, right? Like we know for a fact that there are institutions that are like in the process. They're basically just waiting for the like finalization of a bunch of like licensing schemes in the US to like start actually like deploying tokens, deploying chains, which is awesome. Like that's a really good thing. There's bad things about it too, of course. Like, you know, totally regulated stablecoin finance is not necessarily like the crypto dream, right? Like uh, we are kind of leaning towards the like panopticon finance dystopian outcome right now, rather than the like utopian kind of like crypto anarchist outcome where everyone has like self-sovereignty and like privacy and stuff like that. However, I think it's a good start, right? It's like a way to kind of get into this stuff. What I'm really interested in is kind of what comes next. Like I want crypto to evolve beyond finance. I think it will take some time. I think this next cycle is basically entirely going to be dedicated to finance. But I think today we'll start to see like the seeds of the things that will become non-financial crypto in the future, like verifiable servers, like autonomous, like basically like markets for autonomous actions. Like markets for things that are not just like existing finance, but things like markets for curation, markets for services, etc. I think those are what are like really most exciting to me.
Solid points. I think everybody tuning in must be taking notes of whatever you've been saying so far. So, for the folks tuning in who might be prepping their own token launches, what's your best advice on building like a healthy and engaged community?
Oh man. Launching tokens is really, really difficult. Prepare yourself. Uh, I mean, I think like, unfortunately, like the sad reality is like launching a token doesn't really have very much to do with your core product. You have to think of it almost as an entirely separate product. I think that's a big challenge. Like it's very easy. It is entirely possible to like do super well on launching a token and then just not have a product at all, as we see from just the tons and tons of tokens out there that just are in this situation. And then it's also very possible to have a product that's really, really working, but a token that just fails, right? And so I think like getting both right is extremely difficult, and like I think just requires being extremely pragmatic. I would say like a big part of getting it right is I think it helps a lot if you're consumer facing, because like you know people, it just helps people understand what you're doing, because they can go and actually use your product. If you're not consumer facing, then it's like worthwhile to just build a consumer facing product on top of yourself, even if only just to capture attention, which is interesting. I think it also helps a lot to like try to work as much as possible with like existing other communities, because like the reality is there's not actually that many people in this space, and so like it's going to be very hard to like build like a niche community of your own that is entirely your own. And then beyond that, I think a lot of it is just like high touch personal interactions, right? Like it's like way, 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 way better to build like a community of 1,000 people who really care about you than try to build a community of like 50,000 people. Because the reality is like the 50,000 person community, like they're gonna dip as soon as the airdrop happens, right? It's the people, like the 500 to 1,000 people that remain are the ones that actually really care about you. And it's like what's most important is to figure out who those people are and give them tokens. And yeah, aside from that, I would say like airdrops suck. Like they're not like a good model whatsoever. Unfortunately, like I really wish that they were, but I think effective token distribution is just such a challenge. I do think public sales are actually, now that public sales are like sort of in a better legal standing, I think like they're actually a much, much better way to go for projects. And then the last thing I'll say is like, there's a weird like uncanny valley situation with tokens where like you want to either tokenize right at the start of the project before really anything. So then that way, like all of the VCs, all the holdings, everything are like public, and there's no sort of like VC backing or anything whatsoever that is like private, and you can just like do public sales as much as you want, and you just have, everybody has like transparency as to what's going on. Or alternatively, you want to tokenize basically only after you have like PMF and have scaled and have won the entire market, and then you have to treat it basically as like an IPO. Most teams, and we actually also did this, like most teams sort of tokenize somewhere in the middle. And I think that's a mistake at this point. Like, I think that like tokenizing somewhere in the middle puts you into the situation where like it forces you to choose to focus on one thing versus another, either the token or the product, because neither are de-risked, right? And so because of that, you end up in this situation where like the token necessarily like pulls focus away from like traction, or traction pulls the focus away from the token. And so I think my recommendation to a lot of people is like I think there is a way to thread that needle, right? If you really want to like the problem with like tokenizing really late is like, okay, well, it just creates these like unrealistic expectations, right? You end up in situations like a lot of the big token launches, like Eigen, stuff like that, where like the expectations just blow completely out of control, because like everyone's like, oh, well, like all these people have bought in and like everybody's expecting like to receive a higher amount than they actually receive, because nobody else knows how many other people are involved, right? I think the way to kind of align incentives better here is something that this space hasn't really started to do yet, but I think it should, which is launch earlier, but don't make tokens transferable. Like, start distributing tokens and have a very clear, fair, transparent process for how tokens are distributed, and distribute them, but just don't make them transferable. Like, don't, and like have the DAO or someone else like whatever, some sort of process to vote to make them transferable like a couple of years in the future. And then that way it happens for everybody at the same time, right? And you're like decoupling the risk of the distribution from the risk of trading and liquidity, because those are two different things. And like right now they happen all at once, which is really bad.
Awesome. So earlier you mentioned that protocols really need to accelerate to solve problems that most aren't addressing yet. So I'm curious here, do you think the current pace of innovation in the space is held back more by tech limitations or by economic factors like incentive or market structures? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I think the current pace of innovation in this space is held back by, um, I think, by market structure. Like, I think it's a combination of like the incentives around crypto are really, really borked in a lot of ways, right? Like with the thing with like traditional products is like there is just like there are like the fires of user, like the market, right? That you can't escape. Like, if you, no matter what you do, you can have as much hype as possible, you can raise as much money as you want, but if you launch a product that nobody cares about, it's going to die. There's nothing you can do about it, right? Like, that doesn't exist in crypto. And because of that, I think people end up optimizing on a bunch of things that are not necessarily the thing that actually matters. And so I think, like, for instance, a good example of this, right, is like everybody optimizes for like Twitter and Twitter engagement. And the reason for this is because like you're much more likely to have a success. Like, your project could be going to shit, but like you're much more likely to have a successful token if you are just like terminally on Twitter, or at least someone from your ecosystem is terminally on Twitter posting about you, right? And I think that's kind of like a totally broken incentive, right? Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Obviously, it's super important for people for there to be like founders or other people that are like championing an idea or a product in public, but like that shouldn't be the only thing that matters. It should also be a bunch of other things, right? And so I think like we would actually probably be doing a lot better as an industry if we got out of this like mentality of, if we stopped having this like dual mandate of building successful products and also successful tokens, and if we were able to like basically stop entirely prioritizing building products for ourselves. Right? So like most crypto products are basically building for the same core group of users, and like trying to capture them over and over again, and which is why you have this like sort of copy pasta mechanism. And like there doesn't really need to be another sort of general purpose chain at the moment. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, build app chains. App chains are super important. There should actually be many, many chains, but they should be app chains, right? And like, I think people are kind of, it's like in most other industries, people are like much more interested and willing to try to do things that are creative and disruptive, because the EV of doing something that's creative and disruptive is roughly the same as doing something, same or better than doing something that is like not. Whereas in this industry, that's not true. Like, it's much easier to raise and launch a token if you're doing something that somebody else is doing as well, where they've made a bunch of money. And so I think that's like, until we fix this, I think we will always have this like incentive structure within the space that drives projects to um, not prioritize like innovation and like real user feedback, and sort of like actually breaking out of this ecosystem, but instead prioritize like focusing on existing crypto users and doing the same thing over and over.
Nice, nice. And I'd also like to know a little like off the topic, like what's one important way you're thinking about like entire ecosystem has changed since you first got involved in the space?
Yeah. What is the question, like in what ways has that ecosystem changed, or?
Yeah, since you joined, after you joined, like
Yeah. Yeah, I started working on Ethereum in 2016.
nice.
So there's some things that have really changed. There's some things that have not really changed. Um, some things that have not really changed are like, even at the time, a lot of the biggest conversations were around user experience, around things like how do we do gas and account abstraction, right? How do we figure out, how do we do scalability without trade-offs? So these are problems that still exist and are still quite important, right? Which just is just a testament to like how important and fundamental some of these problems are. For what it's worth, I do think we're a lot closer than we've ever been, right? Like I think that the work that's being done right now with chain abstraction really gets us there. It's just a matter of like it's like all the research and the right like the how to build it and what to build is now answered. It's just like now building it and getting it out there and getting adoption, which is the open question, which is good. I think that there are a lot of things that yeah, I think there are a lot of things that have changed. I would say in general, like crypto in general is kind of going through a bit of an identity crisis right now. That identity crisis comes from the fact that like the original idea behind a lot of this stuff was like, if you create a generalized platform that is decentralized, that you can build protocols on top of, you can go and build really just entirely novel ways to have like public goods on the internet that are unstoppable and that could potentially solve a lot of like core coordination problems for the world. Um, Finance is one example of this, right? Finance is one sort of like coordination primitive. Economics in general is the like study of how we most effectively allocate resources. But there were a lot of other interesting ideas around things like governance, around things like other kinds of markets, like I said, curation, prediction, etc., that were very like talked about and thought about at the time back in 2016, 2017, and even up until like 2020. DeFi really, really took off, and I think that has like sort of what's basically happened is that like everybody, like I said earlier, everybody's sort of like the incentives have basically driven everyone towards like risk, like
So
de-risking. Hello, I think I lost you. Hello, Koshi.
hello. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey.
Right.
So I don't know if this is on
Yeah.
your side or on mine. Okay, I'm gonna assume it's on Koshi's side, and we're gonna keep going. Um, So I think that like the incentives have kind of driven this space away from like experimentation on some of these like breakthrough ideas and towards doing DeFi, because DeFi it's just like it's proven at this point. But I also think a lot of the opportunities in DeFi are gone at this point. Like it's like the big things like decentralized exchange, lending, things like that, like have like a lot of the core primitives have already been established. It's gonna be really hard to like disrupt those primitives, right? And so I think like that's a big change. Like people's philosophy around what to build has changed a lot, but I think it's time for it to change back. Like I think people need to start experimenting a lot more again. And until we do that, I think like there's this risk that crypto will be relegated to basically just being like, on-chain finance, but like not even really decentralized, but just on-chain finance. Um, Also, I have lost Kushi completely. I'm still not entirely sure if this is on my side or hers. So let's see. Folks in the chat, um, can you hear me? Doesn't seem like it. Okay, cool. I mean,
Hi. Yeah, apologies. I believe there was some glitch and I was not able to see you anymore. So, yeah, let's pick right wherever we.
cool. So I did end up actually finishing answering the question. It sounds like the folks in the chat were able to hear it, which is good. So if you want to just keep going, that's probably best.
Sure. So, all right, before we wrap up, time for a bold prediction from your end. Uh, I'd like to know, how do you see the chain abstraction and the cross-chain liquidity markets shaping up by the end of 2025?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would love to say that chain abstraction will be solved by then, but
Yes.
I don't know. Like I've been hopeful for that for such a long time now that I don't know if it's real. I do think that like we're very close. I really want projects like Octo and others to really like get a lot of adoption, because I think like as soon as that happens, we really change a lot of the narrative around this space. We just like make this so much easier for everybody. And we can finally stop focusing on infrastructure and do like more interesting things with our lives, right? Uh, so I would say like my bold prediction for end of 2025 is like I do think that we will see chain abstraction on at least like the top chains. Um, I think that like generally speaking, the like prices for doing things on the top chains will basically be zero, and we will come pretty close to being able to treat all those chains as like a single chain. I think for a lot of the longer tail chains, it might take some time. And then I think my other predictions for 2025 are, I think by the end of 2025, we will see uh, like top three fintechs deploying stablecoins and potentially their own chains. Uh, I think folks like Robinhood, PayPal, others, they've been like waiting in the sidelines for a really long time. It remains to be seen what their approach will be to take those assets across chains. We're kind of interested to see what happens there. I do think stablecoin fragmentation is going to become the new fragmentation that everybody starts talking about, because it's just it's a problem that's just waiting to happen. Everybody's issuing their own version, and no one's going to accept the same thing. That is another place where Everclear helps a lot, because we could just like settle all these assets cross asset very easily. And I think that will like help a lot of the chain abstraction players too, right? Because then you can say like, okay, well, I don't necessarily need to have this one very specific type of USDC or USD in order to go and like use an application somewhere. I could just use USD, and it just uses some representation of USD that's like issued by like PayPal in this case on some chain to do lending. But then when I go and withdraw it, it's using like the Revolut version of USD. I think that's gonna be really nice. Uh, Also, I suspect that more and more people will actually we will actually end up getting like more mainstream adoption, either like at the end of this year or sometime early next year, and that will start to come from users that are. I mean, it will still be early. It's not going to be like everything, but it'll basically come from users that are using like financial applications where they just don't even realize that there's a blockchain under the hood. Right? So like I'm using Robinhood to go and do payments in like Southeast Asia or like in like South America and places where like there are just no where there's just no other alternative for like digital payments. And like that is really, I think, where a lot of these like bigger players are aiming to go and expand their markets today. And so I'm kind of excited to see that. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. Thanks for hanging around and sharing these awesome insights. Always great to chat with someone who is leading the charge in such a dynamic space. And everyone who
Of
tuned
course.
in, a big thank you to you all as well. Don't forget to check out Everclear and follow along on their exciting journey. Catch you all in the next episode. Thank you so much, Arjun, for joining.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, everybody. Bye, all.
Bye bye.